Hello and welcome to the live Nonprofit Pro webinar, Building a Data-Driven Future for Fundraising, sponsored by Fundraise Up. I'm Amanda Cole, Nonprofit Pro's editor-in-chief and the host of today's event. Before we get started, let me take a second to point out the resources widget at the bottom of your console. It looks like an open book. If you missed the Tech Tips video playing leading up to the webinar, you can always click this widget to access our Tech Tips PDF as well as other webinar resources. Here today to discuss building a data-driven future for fundraising, we have Nick Miller. Nick is a marketing professional dedicated to using his strengths in writing and design to grow the good in the world. Through his work at Fundraise Up, he supports nonprofits in advancing their missions by making it easy for their donors to give well. In his personal life, he's driven by a passion to make education more accessible and better individualized for learners. And at home, you'll find him preparing the table for a good meal. He sees food as a common denominator, a universal language for bringing the world together. And with that, I'll hand it off to Nick.
Thank you so much, Amanda. And it's true. I love food. Just had an excellent lunch. And if you're joining in now, I hope you have also had an excellent lunch if you're over here on the East Coast, and looking forward to your lunch if you're over on the West Coast. Today, we are going to be talking about how to build a data-driven future for fundraising. And this is, of course, applicable to every single nonprofit out there, and certainly became more important as we moved into 2021, a year certainly marked by the global pandemic. A lot of what we're going to talk about today will focus on actually the for-profit world and how we're able to pull how stores and online retailers have used certain tools, methodologies, and approaches to psychology and purchasing psychology to engage people to buy more products. And we're going to look at how we can use those same approaches in the world of good. But before we do that, I need to plug in my computer because I see that the power cable came undone and I certainly don't want to run out of battery mid-show. So thank you so much. So let's dive in. E-commerce platforms utilize data-driven decisions and modern technology to increase conversion. And greater conversion means more revenue. If you are unfamiliar with the concept of conversion or simply need a refresher, let me walk you through what this looks like. And so you can think of this as a funnel. And at the very top of your funnel, you have people who arrive on your website, on your nonprofit's website. And let's say there's 100 of them. Now, thinking about this funnel, as people progress through the top of it, which is the widest part, and move down toward the very bottom, we see a narrowing, right? And each person that drops off through that narrowing is essentially a lost conversion. And our goal is always to have as many people as we can who visit your website move on to make a donation. And in the for-profit world, that means inviting people who visit, say, an online retailer's website to continue through with their purchase and become a customer. And again, the more people we get to do that, the greater the revenue. So let's look at a few examples here. So on the screen, you're going to see a first example here for Warby Parker. They make great glasses. I have a pair myself, and it's so easy to purchase eyewear through their website. And they do a few really interesting things here. And you'll notice, for example, that they are setting up the shopper with an example of the value that's being delivered to them. And oftentimes that is something that in the nonprofit space, we sometimes miss. And so we have to make sure that it's easily seen that value will be derived from, in this case, a purchase, in the case of nonprofits, from donating. And it goes beyond just providing value for the donor or the consumer. So let's look at this example from CiCi's Closet, for example. And a lot of organizations that I've spoken with over the past year have put in the front seat in terms of what they need to focus on mobile wallets, express wallets. And so you'll see in this example I've highlighted in a green rectangle there on the slide that CiCi's Closet here in New York City is providing their shoppers with many ways to complete their purchase. You'll see a purple icon for Shop Pay, You'll see Google Pay represented there, PayPal, and Amazon Pay as well. And the value here is that the consumer, the person who's shopping on the CiCi's Closet website, can go through the purchasing checkout and select a payment method that's going to make the most sense to them. And in this case, none of these are actually asking me to enter my payment details. If I'm using a credit card, it's not asking me to enter the account number or any other details. It's saying you can click this button. We're going to find the payment method that you have on file with Amazon or PayPal or Google Pay, and we're going to drop it into your checkout here. The value here, of course, is that somebody doesn't have to go searching for their payment method. And oftentimes that's where we see a drop-off in conversion. People enter a donation form, or in this case, a e-commerce checkout with the intention of purchasing their product, but they ultimately don't make the purchase because there was a friction point with the payment method. If they had to dig around in their wallet to get that card out, it might just be that much more time that they just don't have to complete the purchase. So smart shops in the e-commerce world, like CiCi's Closet in New York City, will use these express or mobile wallet payment options. Let's look at another example here. This one's from the clothing store Forever 21. And they do something really unique. Instead of presenting a completely separate page with the shopping cart and the checkout process, they have a pop-up that when you click shopping cart, it's just going to show this screen right in front of the shopper. And this process, this approach is designed to reduce the likelihood of a shopper abandoning their purchase. And of course, perhaps the most recognizable example that I can show is from Amazon. And so Amazon is well known for being perhaps the largest online retailer at this point, but one of the technologies that put them on the map was one-click technology. And so Amazon realized that there was an opportunity to completely remove the payment method friction from a consumer's purchase. And so literally with a single click of a button, my purchase can be complete. And I'm on my way, and my item that I just purchased is on its way in the mail to me. And again, we're talking about e-commerce here, and recognizing how in this for-profit space, there are technological approaches being taken that reduce the friction, not only in the actual checkout donation flow itself, but also for the consumer themselves. They have to do less thinking. They have to engage less of their brain. And this is actually a very good way to think about it, because if you consider that the more brain calories somebody has to spend on making a decision, on completing their donation checkout, or they're making their purchase, the less likely they are to make that purchase, then our opportunity then is to reduce the amount of brain power that they have to apply to that. And we'll see in a moment how we can apply that for good. But I want to show a final example here. And I'm sure a majority of you are familiar with subscription-style purchases. And so what I'm showing here is an example that comes from Chewy.com. They're an online store for pet products. And you'll see here that they have an auto-ship feature. And this auto-ship feature is what's known as an upsell. And here's why it's an upsell. So the original purchase for this item would have been, let's say, I think it's somewhere $44, something like that, after discounts. And that would have been a one-time purchase. But what Chewy is promoting to me as a consumer is the ability to engage in their auto-ship program, which means I'm going to spend less money today, but I will be locked in to purchasing this item on a recurring basis. In this example, every 4 weeks. And so this means that over the course of, say, 12 months, the value that I provide to Chewy as a consumer, the revenue that I drive for them, will be greater than if I made just a one-time purchase today. So this is an upsell. And even upsells like this, which encourage consumers to purchase more, can be used to invite donors to give more. But there's some bad news here. Traditionally, we've seen that the nonprofit industry as a whole tends to lag behind the technological advances made by the for-profit world. And as we lag behind, it means that we're not able to engage in data-driven decision-making because we don't have the tools, we don't have the numbers, we don't have the data. And we have to have that in order to look ahead to the future and say, here's how we move from what we fundraised this year to what we want to hit next year and how we achieve milestone after milestone. Let's take a peek into what a majority of online donation forms still look like. So for example, we have a fairly typical online donation form here. It's not particularly inviting. It's not particularly exciting. In fact, there's a lot of input friction here. We have a lot of input fields. We have a lot of text. And again, thinking about how any given donor has to exert brain power to complete a donation, this is presenting me with a lot of work to do. There's a lot sitting in front of me, and I don't necessarily know what I should do first. You'll also notice that in terms of payment methods, we're really limited to paying by card or giving from our bank account. We don't see any of those express-style wallets that we saw with CiCi's Closet. In this next example, we even see that the nonprofit has included on their website a line of text that says, if you don't see the donation form in front of you, you need to refresh the page. In e-commerce, this would be a conversion killer, and certainly the same is true within the fundraising space as well. If somebody has to refresh their page in order to load the form to give, there's the likelihood that they might not go on to give. So we want to avoid things like that, and certainly issues like this have been dealt with modern e-commerce platforms. A final example that I'll show you here is a nonprofit that's simply used the checkout form from their payment gateway for somebody to make a donation. And the problem here is that we lose all of the context that surrounds why somebody would want to give to the nonprofit. If you just engaged a donor with a very emotional story that you either told through words, images, or videos, and then push them to a donation page that looks like this, you lose all of those special moments, and you potentially lose the engagement for that donor. They look at this and they say, I'm not sure if this is the nonprofit's form that I was supposed to see. Maybe they close out. Maybe they go back to the page, they get distracted, and end up not making the donation. All of this we want to avoid. We want to look over the fence into the world of e-commerce and see what is working so well that encourages people to buy more. How can we plug it in for our nonprofit so that we're raising more money and can use the information that we gain to have more data-driven decision-making moving forward. And this is incredibly important because, as you'll see on the screen here, consumer behavior is donor behavior and vice versa. So you'll see that in 2020, 12.9% of all online purchases, or all purchases, for-profit purchases, were made online. And I'm sorry, I switched those numbers around. 14.3% of all retail purchases were made online. Similarly, in the nonprofit world, 12.9% of all giving was from an online source. So we see not a perfect match, but a near mirroring of how consumers are behaving and how donors are behaving. And it's very important to draw this correlation, to show this correlation between donor behavior and consumer behavior, because when we understand that the behaviors and the strategies that drive consumers to make more purchases can be the same strategies and behaviors that drive people to give more, we can start to implement them for good. And so here's a question that I'd like to posit to us. What would an online donation experience look like if it were built on these e-commerce principles that we've been talking about? And ultimately, how would that lead to us as fundraisers making more data-driven decisions? And to highlight how we can pull inspiration from the e-commerce world, I'm going to use our own platform here at Fundraise Up as an example. So let's start by looking at the donation form itself. One of the problems that we've traditionally had within online fundraising is that we don't have a great way to personalize and individualize the giving experience for every single donor that goes online to our websites to donate. We don't necessarily have this problem when we do direct mail because we can pull the file from our database, we can import it into Excel, and do some math using formulas to calculate the ideal ask amounts for donors. But that same hands-on approach that helps us individualize traditionally has not existed within online fundraising. And so that's one of the things we noticed here at Fundraise Up when we created the platform was that disparity. And this was an opportunity for us to look at the world of e-commerce and say, well, airlines are doing it, online stores are doing it. All of these retailers are finding ways to personalize the shopping experience for consumers. Let's do the same for donors. And so one of the things we've done is implement artificial intelligence and machine learning as a subset of AI inside of the donation process itself. And by doing this, we're able to individualize. And so, for example, in the screenshot you'll see on the slide right now, you'll see 6 suggested donation amounts plus an amount that's been filled in blue text there. Every dollar amount that you see there has been individualized for every single person that's visiting the nonprofit's website. And our AI technology is looking at factors like the geographic location of a donor, the time of day, the day of month, income data for the geographic area. We'll even get as granular as looking at the device that somebody's donating from. If it's a phone, we're curious to see what the carrier is. Is it T-Mobile? Is it Sprint? Is it AT&T? We'll also look at the battery level of that device. And if the battery level is low, it's in the red, we might show different amounts. And by taking this approach, we're able to engage about 50 to 52% of a nonprofit's audience in giving an amount that the AI has suggested. And what we're essentially doing here is right-sizing a donation amount and ensuring that what somebody sees is what's as close to what they're likely to give so that you can complete that conversion. And again, to look at the world of e-commerce, we're saying what the product that we're presenting and the price point is what somebody's most likely to add into their cart and go on to purchase. One of the examples we saw from the e-commerce world also involved upsells. That was that Chewy example that we looked at, where they have an auto ship feature which allows you to purchase the item on a recurring basis for a lower price than if you bought it one time. Well, we can take that same concept, that same approach, and build it into the world of donations as well. So the example that you're seeing on your screen here is our upsell to monthly support. And so what we do is we look at the donor's original one-time amount. In this case, it's $120. And we say, there's 2 opportunities for you to give on a recurring basis. You could either give $30 a month, or you could give $25 a month. In both cases, the donor is giving less today. They're not giving $120 today. They're giving $30 or $25 today. But over the course of, say, 12 months, they will ultimately give more to the nonprofit. And in the world of e-commerce, this is, of course, great for building stickiness with customers. And in the world of nonprofits, this is great for building on the lifetime value of the donor, building on retention and stickiness as well. Something that we also do here at Fundraise Up, which is something that watching this presentation as people who run nonprofits, is to consider where you can implement these donation upsells. So in the example you see on the screen, this actually comes at the front of the donation. Before you've even selected your payment method, we'll show something like this. But there's also an opportunity to insert upsells like this in other places in the donation flow. So let me show you a quick chart of what this can look like. So on the far left, you'll see how a donor can move through your donation form workflow and then complete the transaction. And it's at that point of transaction completion that the conversion is also complete. So again, we have that funnel where you have, say, 100 users that visit your website, and you want to convert more of them into people who donate. And we don't want to put things in their way that's going to reduce the likelihood of them giving. And so in this example, we're talking about adding an upsell after they've actually made their base donation, after the conversion has been complete. So the transaction is complete. We then show them the thank you screen or thank you page. That's that view that you see after you make a donation. Typically, we'll say thank you for donating. It might include a message from the executive director and details about the transaction. In some thank you pages, there might even be tools for sharing on social media that you donated. But what we see is an opportunity to invite the donor in to further their support. So on that same screen, we might invite them in to make an additional donation. And so let me show you what that might look like. And again, we're using the Fundraise Up platform as our example. And you'll see the opportunity to become a monthly donor. So in this case, the donor was originally going to make a $26.70 one-time donation. And they did that. It was completed, and then they were presented with the view that you see here. And it says, by giving monthly, you're going to help us more. And so the amount that we will propose to them is based on AI, and in this case, it's $10. The donor could, of course, modify the amount, and they could also say no. But we make it easy for them to say yes. And this is what's critically important at this point for allowing a donor to further their support. When they click, yes, I'll give monthly, because we already have their payment method on file, we're able to just lock it in and finish it right then and there. What's really powerful about that is that you are actually engaging your donor in two things. You have gotten them to give a one-time gift, and in the same donation flow, you've also engaged them as a recurring supporter. Typically, that's not easy to do, and it involves a lot of marketing. It involves a lot of direct mail to send out to people. It sometimes involves phone calls where you follow up with someone after their one-time donation and prompt them to give on a monthly basis. It's all happening in one checkout flow here. And where this becomes important when we look at this from a data-driven future perspective is that we don't want to have to spend our time and effort as fundraisers in engaging in activities that we could otherwise shift to technology. And we can let technology do the heavy lifting. And by doing that, we learn a lot more about our donors because we get numbers, we get data, and that data we can then use to make informed decisions about how we modify our fundraising strategy. Where do we put our money? Do we put it more into social media? Do we put more into ads? Or do we find that more traditional channels like direct mail and picking up the phone and in-person visits actually drive the most revenue? It is all important, and these types of decisions can only be made when you have good data, and good data comes from technology. Another area that I want to highlight for us are payment methods. So you might recall that CiCi's Closet example that we looked at where we saw those express wallets. We had Google Pay, Amazon Pay, PayPal, and Shop Pay. And now that we know that the same behaviors, the same needs that drive consumers can apply to donors, we then know that we need to also provide donors with these types of payment methods. But before we touch on those payment methods, I also want to highlight the ability for donors to cover transaction costs. And this is one area of online fundraising that has really been hotly debated for some time. And the argument has been made, is it right to ask donors to cover fees? And a lot of times the response is no, we can't ask donors to cover costs. They aren't interested in it. That's not why they're here to give. They shouldn't have to cover our administrative fees, so on and so forth. But a lot of these assumptions are not based in data. They're not grounded in a data-driven decision. And so we heard this question enough here at Fundraise Up that we wanted to research it ourselves. And we found some very interesting numbers. First of all, we found that 92% of donors will cover transaction costs for a nonprofit. Additionally, we found that a majority of donors, if you pre-check this box for them, will keep it checked, and they'll go on to cover transaction costs during the course of the donation. And we also found that for people that give multiple times, if they covered transaction costs on their initial donation, they'll continue to do it on subsequent donations as well. And where this is important from data-driven decision-making is, number one, to know that this feature, this option that we present to donors, we're showing it because data says we should. And number two, this is allowing more money to flow through the door for impact. And what that looks like in the context of Fundraise Up, for example, is that when a donor is covering transaction costs, they're not only covering that fee that you typically have with, say, a credit card, they're also covering the cost of using the fundraising platform itself, which means the nonprofit is receiving 100% of the intended donation and not having to worry about expenditures for the technology platform itself. And so when you're armed with this data, when you're armed with this knowledge, it's going to ensure that more of the donor support can flow toward your mission and flow toward impact. It's very, very powerful. But let's also talk about these payment methods for a moment. So in the example you see on the screen here, we have Apple Pay, we have traditional card methods, PayPal. In the lower left corner, we have a payment technology that's called Click to Pay, and of course, the ability to give from your bank account. Some interesting data that we found here was that when you have PayPal plugged into your mix, about 20% of all of your donations will come through there. Donors and consumers really use PayPal because it allows them to have a stored payment method on file, and it's also, for a lot of people, a trustworthy way to pay for things online. And so in the world of nonprofits, 20% of donations we see coming through PayPal, and we also found that an almost 7% increase in conversion rate just by showing it as a payment option. This means that even if somebody doesn't click PayPal and checks out with PayPal, they're seeing it as a trust indicator. Very similar to how we might use a graphic of a lock somewhere in the donation form to help people feel like they're giving securely, or how many nonprofits are in the practice of showing a Guide Star or Better Business Bureau badge on their website. These are all trust indicators. And so in this case, we can look at PayPal and say, one of two things is going to happen. Either somebody's going to give through it, or they're going to see it as a sign of trust and continue on with their donation. Let's also talk about information that we're capturing during a donation. And the reason I want to highlight this is because, on one hand, it's an area where we could see a reduction in conversion, where fewer people donate because they're presented with too many form fields, and two, an opportunity for us to look at how we gather data and how we use that data downstream. And again, we're using Fundraise Up as an example here. And through our own platform, we really just require 3 fields, 3 data points to be provided by a donor. That's their first name, their last name, and their email address. And a lot of times, I'll have a conversation with a nonprofit where they're concerned that they need to be capturing the donor's mailing address or billing address to help verify their identity and for the payment to be processed successfully. That may have been true with older platforms and more legacy payment methods and payment gateways, but we partner with Stripe, for example, as our payment gateway, and we take their technology and we pair it with our own proprietary technology, and we're able to create a world in which we really just need these 3 data points, and we're able to identify a donor's identity using other factors, such as IP address and other behind-the-scenes things that are part of our proprietary mix of technology. But again, this is important for 2 reasons. Number one, we can ensure that fewer people are going to drop off before they make their donation. And number 2, it helps us focus on what data we're going to collect and where. And one of the huge benefits of requiring an email address, for example, for your online donation, is that it's going to help you start to build out a very solid digital donor base. In fact, one of the questions that we received ahead of today's presentation had to do with building that donor base. And we'll touch on that at the end of the presentation today a little bit more. But again, this is very important for helping you get good, clean data that you can then segment out and then solicit down the road. And while we're talking about mailing address, I want to highlight some statistics that we found here. So on the screen right now, you're going to see a couple of values that are in red. And so we see that when you require a mailing address, you're going to lose about 10.6% on average in terms of conversion. And it gets worse for donors that are giving abroad, so outside of the United States and even outside of Canada as well. We'll see an 18.2% drop in conversion rate. So that's almost 20% of donors that you might lose just because you are requiring them to provide a mailing address, for better or for worse. Some organizations might really want to hold on to that piece of information for some mail campaign that they have coming down the pike. But what I will recommend to you here from a data standpoint is that there are other opportunities outside of this particular donation flow where you can collect this information. And so as an example, you can collect just the first name, the last name, and the email address in the donation form itself, and then engage the donor with a follow-up marketing drip email campaign where you say, we're so glad that you gave. Here is an example of the impact that you're having. We would like to send you something in the mail. Maybe it's a postcard, maybe it's an impact report, and that's your opportunity to get their mailing address. And it didn't have to hinder the online donation conversion. Something else I want to highlight here in terms of innovations in technology is some work that we've done with our friends over at Double the Donation. And so I'm sure many of you are familiar with company matching, whether it's through Double the Donation or HEP Data or any other vendor. We've particularly chosen to partner with Double the Donation because we're able to create some very tight integrations and experiences that can upsell donors. So here's an example. If I'm a donor and I move through a donation form checkout using Fundraise Up in this example, I might select that my company that I work for is Starbucks. And so I'll write that into the field. It'll be looked up in the database. And if I were giving, say, a $10 donation, I would have been prompted with a screen that's very similar to what you see on the slide here. And our platform would prompt you by saying, Starbucks has a minimum donation match amount of $25. Would you consider increasing the size of your base donation, the $10 donation, to meet the minimum? We see about 30% of donors opt to upgrade their gift to meet that minimum match amount. And this is hugely important from a conversion standpoint and certainly from a data perspective as well. So let me unpack this here for us. We're taking our base donation amount, which was previously $10, we're upgrading that base donation amount to $25. And then as a donor, we're saying, yes, we want to engage in company matching here. So for your nonprofit, that's checking the box for, yes, we engaged this donor with company matching. And then third, we are increasing our overall support to the nonprofit. So we went from $10 to $25, which will ultimately become a $50 gift when it's matched by Starbucks. And again, this is very important for teams that are looking to the future of fundraising, looking at the data and saying, where can we optimize? Where can we reduce what we're spending and increase what we're bringing in the door from donors? And by using technology like this that's inspired by e-commerce that upsells donors to give more, we help reach those goals. And all of this is very, very possible, and there's tangible evidence for it. For example, I'm going to put up some numbers here from our friends over at UNICEF USA. By taking this approach to fundraising, by utilizing AI, by pulling from the world of e-commerce and implementing things like upsells and modern payment methods, they see a 50% increase in their digital revenue. That's money coming in from online donors. They see 90% of their donors covering transaction costs. And recall that when those donors are covering transaction costs, they're ensuring that you get 100% of the donation and making sure that you as a nonprofit don't have to foot the bill for the use of the technology. And in the case of UNICEF, they're also seeing a 300% increase in revenue. In the number of recurring monthly donors. And that is thanks to tools like an upsell from one-time to monthly support. Again, these numbers that you see here are representative of what UNICEF USA has done. And they're, of course, a globally recognized nonprofit. But these same numbers are also the results that are seen by smaller shops as well. And so I know that we'll have some people on the call today that are from shops where it's you and one other person, or maybe you, a executive director, and somebody to handle the books. You can see the same results as well by implementing technology like this and by looking at what is driving consumer behavior and plugging it into your fundraising strategy. And when you do this, you are arming yourselves with A, data that you can trust, and B, data that is going to provide action steps for what you do next year, or what you do for Giving Tuesday, or what you do for year-end fundraising. With that said, we have some time today to go through some questions that have been asked. So I'll switch over to our Q&A slide here. And we have an opportunity to do this. And to help me with this, I believe Amanda's going to jump back in and show us what some of the questions are that have come in.
Yeah, I'm going to start with some questions that came in regarding online payment methods. So do you feel there is a generational gap in the online payment methods currently being used by nonprofits? Like millennials might favor PayPal, but Gen Z prefers Venmo. And also, what percentage of donors are using Apple Pay?
Very good question. I would say that there are generational preferences. And so we see a lot of younger donors, such as millennials and donors from the Gen Z group, that will give through more of these express wallet payment methods, such as Apple Pay or Google Pay and even Venmo. And the reason it's important to provide these types of payment methods to these members of your audience is because it's what they're used to using in their everyday lives. As an example, I purchased a cup of coffee this morning on the way to work, and I did it by tapping my phone against the card reader, and I paid with Apple Pay. Similarly, I later boarded the subway and paid through Apple Pay. So these are payment methods that I use in my everyday life, and when a nonprofit provides them to me as a way of donating, it's how I will choose to use them. That said, you should provide the full spectrum of payment methods online so that you can engage both your younger donors who are going to want to give using express wallets and donors who maybe are more comfortable with giving using a credit or debit card or bank account. And then the second part of that question was, of course, about the percentage of people that are giving through Apple Pay. It's fairly low. The number I can't think of off the top of my head, but it's fairly low. But the fact is there are people that do give through it. So we have a value that's greater than zero, which means it's something that you should present to your donors.
Okay, perfect. And I just want to also encourage, if anyone has any questions, just drop them in the Q&A. What tools and strategies would you recommend to foster a data-driven mindset within your organization? And in that, can you help tech-shy people to find comfort in this technology?
Yes, absolutely. And as the technology within the nonprofit sphere becomes more advanced over time, it becomes more important for us to be comfortable with it. Because if we're not comfortable with the tools we're using, then we won't use them. I will use our platform as an example here, where we have put in a lot of work to make sure that it's very intuitive and easy for the end user to use, but also offers advanced access to the type of data that you need to get. And so as you are looking for tools to use, look for tools that are going to be easy to use, but are also presenting you with the type of data that you need to be able to pull out of it. And so, you may be shopping around now or in the future for new platforms, whether it's a CRM or a donation platform like Fundraise Up, and you want to look for the ability to pull data out really easily so that you can plug it into your other tools. Maybe they're business intelligence tools or email marketing tools. You want to be able to pull data out. And you also want to be able to track where things are coming from. So as an example, somebody might send out an email appeal that includes a donation link in it, an invitation for people to give, well, you need to be able to track that. And as an example, we will pull in that tracking information into the Fundraise Hub platform and make it reportable for you. And what we've made reportable is also data that you can pull into your CRM. So you get this full picture of where the donation originated from, what somebody clicked on, and how it ultimately led to somebody giving through, in this case, a donation powered by Fundraise Hub. All of that information gets stored in your CRM, and then you're able to reference it in the future. And you can provide a breakdown of how well any given campaign worked. And you might find that this particular email campaign or style doesn't work so well, so you invest less in it, and you instead invest more in ads or social media engagements.
Okay, great. And I did hear you allude to this during your presentation. So how do you build an online donor base?
Very good question. And so earlier in the presentation, I talked about how it's really beneficial to collect that email address as required information, not only because in our case we need it to complete the transaction, but in terms of building your online donor base, you are doing that by de facto. By collecting that email address, you then have a digital donor on file, and you can build out that file over time, segment it based on demographics, and then go on to solicit those people again in the future. The other ways that you can build your online audiences are by looking at who's following you on social media. How many people are following you on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook? Because these people are, of course, social media followers, but that also means that they can be digital donors. And you can find ways to engage those people with giving. And that's your lowest hanging fruit. Those are the people who are indicating to you that they have an online presence themselves. They're engaged in social media and are going to be the easiest to solicit.
Okay. Let's see. Let's go into the crypto. We had a few questions on cryptocurrency. So we have an attendee wanting to incorporate cryptocurrency donations with their director as opposed, citing it will be difficult and complicated. What is kind of the leading thinking on integrating and accepting cryptocurrency as a donation medium, and can even small nonprofits benefit?
Very good question. And for many people viewing, you may still be very confused about cryptocurrency and its value. The fact is, there are a lot of people with this type of property at this point. And especially if people, donors in our case, if they purchased cryptocurrency when it was very cheap, it's now of great value to your nonprofit organization. And if we weren't living in 2021, where there's now very modern technology to help us accept cryptocurrency as donations, then I would be like this director who is very hesitant to start accepting it. But there are tools like the Giving Block, which make it basically a turnkey solution for accepting cryptocurrency for your nonprofit. And in fact, we are ourselves very excited to engage in the ability to accept cryptocurrency through our own platform, so that you have a one-stop shop for accepting PayPal, accepting Apple Pay, credit card donations, and property such as cryptocurrency, without needing to worry about all of the back-end mechanics. We just want to make sure that this donation type, this channel that somebody wants to give through, is available on your website so that you can receive those donations. There are some statistics that we'll look at releasing soon that will provide a lot more light on what we see in terms of cryptocurrency giving, but you can anticipate in some cases average gift sizes that are around $1,000 per donation. And I've spoken with some organizations that already see $1 million or more in annual donation revenue from cryptocurrency. So it's an important channel to have available to your donors. There's technology out there that makes it easy for you to implement it.
Okay, and where can we set up a wallet, and how can we ensure the password is not lost?
for very good questions. There are many platforms out there, such as Coinbase, and there's another that is not coming to mind. But these platforms allow you to very easily set up a cryptocurrency account for your nonprofit, where you'll then have a wallet and a wallet address to which people can make cryptocurrency donations. And cryptocurrency uses blockchain technology, which is incredibly secure, but it also means that you're going to end up with a secured hash password, which is going to be a very long set of characters that you want to make sure is stored. And so my recommendation is to use password managers such as LastPass or Bitwarden to store that key so that you don't lose it. Because if you do lose it, you're not going to be able to access your wallet because it's very, very secure.
Okay. And jumping back to the payment methods, we had a follow-up with Apple Pay, Venmo, and PayPal. Do nonprofits receive their contact info so that they can send them thank yous and add them to their database?
This is also a very good question, and why it's important from a data perspective to use a tool that's going to combine all of these payment methods into a single interface. And so that's what we've done with the Fundraise Up platform, is say you shouldn't be collecting Apple Pay over here, PayPal over here, Venmo up there. It all needs to live in a single interface where somebody can easily give and you can easily collect their information. With Venmo, that can be a little tricky sometimes because you're technically giving through the Venmo app and you're not necessarily giving to the nonprofit directly. You're giving to the software vendor that provides the software to the nonprofit. So it can get a little tricky on the types of information that is collected. So where you can, have it live in a single place. And in our case, that's the Fundraise Up checkout, where we'll make sure that all of that information is collected. An area where we see a deficit is with something like Facebook fundraisers, which are great for engaging your followers in creating P2P style fundraisers, but platforms like Facebook or Instagram aren't always great about providing you as the nonprofit with the contact information for that donor. They give you a big check and it says, here's $50K that your donors raised, but you don't know who they are. So make sure you're using technology. It's going to allow you to very easily track people who are giving using these various payment methods, because otherwise you're not going to have any data and you're not going to be able to make decisions off of that data.
How about how to regain a lapsed donor? Do you have any suggested data points?
This is an area that I have struggled with myself. I previously was a fundraiser working in higher education in our annual fund, and as I'm sure most, if not all of you know, it's incredibly difficult to re-engage a fully lapsed donor. I'm going to use a perspective from sales here for a moment. And so there is this practice of objection handling in the sales process, but there's a school of thought that says, don't get to the point where you have to handle objections. Find a way to basically squash those objections before they even come up. And similarly, when we look at lapsed donors, I would argue that we should focus on the practices that we can put in place to ensure that a donor doesn't lapse. Some cases, it's going to be impossible to retain them, but in most cases, there are opportunities for us. Part of it can come down to technology, and so where we can tackle that for nonprofits on our side is we have some attrition busting tools built into our platform that when a donor wants to cancel, say, the recurring donation, we're going to give them some alternative opportunities. We're going to say, well, why don't you put your plan on pause for a little while, or how about changing the amount of your donation rather than outright canceling it? And that's designed to reduce donors leaving their giving relationship with your nonprofit. And then outside of technology, this is a good reminder that when somebody gives to your organization, you still need to steward them. You still need to continue to show them impact, especially for those recurring donors. And so what you can do is make sure that you're sending impact stories their way. I love getting emails from the nonprofits I support because they're very personalized and individualized to me, And they always tell me what my money is doing by giving it to them, because it's essentially an investment, right? And so I want to know that my money is being put to good use. And when the nonprofit's saying, hey, look what your dollar is doing, Nick, I'm very impressed, and it's going to help prevent me from stopping my giving to that organization. So it's a harmony of technology and fundraising strategy that we put together to help prevent donors from lapsing, so that we don't have to worry about re-engaging lapsed donors.
Okay, great. We have someone who's saying that, how can I get more individuals to join my nonprofit in the leadership role? Many ask, how much am I going to get paid? I did not start a nonprofit organization to receive financial gains for myself, but to help others.
This is always the conundrum I feel with our investment in the nonprofit space as fundraisers, is we have set out to increase the amount of good in the world. And so that means in many ways sacrificing what we're paid as fundraisers. And it also means that it's difficult to hire people that have a salary expectation or just have a minimum amount of money that they need to make in order to live life. And one of the opportunities that we're able to present to our customers as an example is that by using our platform, which again is focusing on e-commerce tech and AI and machine learning and plugging it into the donor experience, you're going to double the donation revenue that you receive for your organization. And how you use that is up to you, but examples that I've seen are nonprofits that use that increase in support to build out a new website so that they can engage more people, so they can better show impact. And yet other organizations have used those gains in support to bring on additional staff members. And so for people that are from grassroots organizations that need to scale up the people power, this is an opportunity to do it, to use data-driven decision-making and good technology to bring more money in the door so that you can start to grow out your team.
Okay, great. Someone mentioned, I know that sometimes you can take in like the transaction fees and stuff, but someone's actually asking, are organizations using your platform including a cost for the platform services included in the fee pay option? Is there a % they use?
So if I'm understanding this correctly, the person asking this question is wondering if that amount that is being shown to the donor is fully inclusive of both the, say, credit card processing fee and the platform cost. Is that correct?
Well, like the credit card fee, is there something similar for to incorporate the platform cost?
Oh, I see.
With the donation. So that's what they're asking at. Does anyone include that cost in there?
Yes, and actually that's precisely how our platform works. It is a completely volume-based pricing model that we have with Fundraise Up, which means that there aren't any recurring subscription fees, so there are no monthly fees, no annual fees, and no contractual costs, which means that all of the costs that you have is bundled into the transaction itself. So if I'm a donor giving $10, there's going to be, say, the credit card processing cost, and then there's going to be a percentage-based cost from us as a software vendor, and we bundle that into that amount that donors can cover. And as a result of the way that we have situated it for the donor, we see about 92% of donors cover both of those costs for the nonprofit.
Okay, great. And we have a few minutes left. So someone wants to know if there's any creative fundraising ideas that you have to share.
This is a nice question to kind of wind down from. You know, we've looked a lot at data and numbers and e-commerce and technology in general, and it can get kind of heavy. But I'd also like to talk about how you can engage your donors, and that can be through things like birthday fundraisers or other tribute-style fundraisers. And so in our platform, we have P2P functionality, and certainly in so many other platforms, there's P2P fundraising functionality. And it's a great way to engage donors in a fun way to fundraise, and also gives you additional channels through which you can receive money. You have your traditional ones, of course, the online donation form, direct mail, over the phone, etc. But you can expand it in a way that is fun and engaging for donors by also saying, hey, it's your birthday, it's holiday, here's a way to fundraise on our behalf, engage people around you. And many nonprofits will even gamify it a little bit and have competition-style fundraisers. So that's an awesome opportunity that if you're not doing it today, you can look to implement even ahead of year end and maybe even ahead of Giving Tuesday as well.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Nick. It looks like we're just out of time for today. So on behalf of Nonprofit Pro and Fundraise Up, I want to thank you for attending today's webinar. Be sure to check out our webinar page to get information on all our archived and upcoming webinars. If you would just take a minute to fill out the brief feedback survey that will appear on your screen next, we would be grateful. Your feedback will influence the webinars we bring to you in the future. I hope to see you at the next Nonprofit Pro webinar.